In 1986, an entire family vanished without a trace in the Wyoming wilderness. 17 years later, nature itself would reveal their darkest secret buried beneath the earth. This isn't just another missing persons case. This is about a family that disappeared so completely, so mysteriously, that even the FBI gave up. But what a tornado uncovered in 2003 would change everything we thought we knew about the Duarte family. Before we dive into this chilling mystery, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Detective Marcus Sullivan, and I've spent the last 23 years investigating cold cases that others have given up on. I've seen families torn apart by violence, witnessed the aftermath of crimes that defy human understanding, and walked through crime scenes that would give most people nightmares for years. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered about the Duarte family. When I first opened their file in 2003, sitting in my cramped office in Cheyenne, I thought I was looking at a routine missing persons case from the 80s, the kind of case that gets assigned to detectives like me because everyone else has moved on to more pressing matters. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The Duarte case would consume the next 5 years of my life and challenge everything I thought I knew about the limits of human science and the depths of government secrecy. The Duartes weren't your typical American family, not by any stretch of the imagination. Dr. Ricardo Duarte was a brilliant biochemist who had earned his PhD from Stanford at the age of 24 and had spent the following decades working for various government contractors throughout the 70s and early 80s. His specialty was cellular regeneration, particularly as it related to radiation exposure and chemical warfare recovery. His published papers, the ones available to the public anyway, suggested a mind that operated on levels most scientists could only dream of reaching. His wife, Dr. Elena Duarte, was equally impressive in her own field. She held a PhD in geological engineering from MIT and had spent years studying underground formations, cave systems, and what she called subterranean habitability factors. Her work had taken her to some of the most remote and dangerous locations on Earth, from the deepest caves in Mexico to the underground research facilities in Antarctica. Their 2 children, Miguel, 16, and Sofia, 14, were already showing signs of following in their parents' intellectual footsteps. Miguel had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for gifted students in advanced chemistry at the University of Colorado, while Sofia had won several regional science fairs for her groundbreaking work in mineralogy and geological formations. The family was, by all accounts, brilliant, close-knit, and completely dedicated to their scientific pursuits. They were also, as I would later discover, involved in research that went far beyond what any civilian scientists should have had access to in 1986. In the summer of 1986, the family decided to take what they called a research vacation to the remote wilderness areas of northeastern Wyoming. This wasn't unusual for the Duartes. They often combined family time with their scientific interests, visiting locations that could serve both as vacation spots and research opportunities. Elena had published papers on the geological formations around Devil's Tower, and Ricardo had expressed interest in the area's unique mineral compositions and their potential applications in his biochemical research. What struck me as particularly odd when I first read their file was how meticulously planned this trip was. They had reserved a remote cabin near Devil's Tower for 6 full weeks, far longer than most families would stay in such an isolated location. They had also rented specialized equipment, geological survey tools, deep soil sampling devices, and what the rental company described as atmospheric monitoring equipment, none of which seemed necessary for a simple family vacation. The last anyone heard from the Duarte family was on July the 15th, 1986, at exactly 3:47 p.m. Mountain Time. Elena had called her sister, Maria Santos, in San Diego, from the landline at their rented cabin. Maria would later tell investigators that Elena sounded happy but distracted during their conversation, as if she were reading from notes or looking at something while they spoke. Elena reported that they had arrived safely at the cabin 2 days earlier, and that the children were excited about exploring the area. She mentioned that Ricardo had found something extraordinarily interesting in the geological surveys of the region, something that had potential implications for his current research projects. When Maria pressed her for details, Elena became evasive, saying only that they would need to extend their stay and that she would call again in a few days. The conversation lasted exactly 7 minutes and 12 seconds, according to phone company records. It would be the last time anyone would hear Elena Duarte's voice. When the family failed to return home by their scheduled date of August 30th, 1986, Maria Santos waited 3 additional days before contacting the authorities. She later explained that the Duartes were known for losing track of time when they were engaged in research, and extending trips wasn't uncommon for them. But when September 3rd arrived with no word from the family, Maria's concern turned to genuine alarm. She contacted the Crook County Sheriff's Department, reporting her sister and brother-in-law's family as overdue from their vacation. The dispatcher initially treated it as a routine welfare check. Remote cabin vacations sometimes ran long, especially when families were enjoying themselves and had no pressing commitments waiting for them back home. Deputy Sheriff Robert Mitchell was dispatched to the cabin on the morning of September 4th, 1986. What he found there immediately escalated the situation from a routine welfare check to an active missing persons investigation. The cabin was completely empty of people, but not in the way you'd expect from a family that had simply packed up and left. All of the family's belongings were still there, exactly as they had apparently left them. Clothes hung neatly in the closets, toiletries were arranged along the bathroom counter, and the refrigerator was still stocked with food, much of which had spoiled in the late summer heat. The children's personal belongings were scattered around the living room, as if Miguel and Sofia had just stepped outside for a moment. Books open to specific pages, a chess game half-finished on the coffee table, Sofia's rock collection spread across the floor near the fireplace. Dr. Ricardo's research materials were spread across the dining room table in what appeared to be organized chaos. Geological maps of the area covered every inch of the table's surface, with several locations circled in red ink and connected by hand-drawn lines that formed complex geometric patterns. Mathematical equations were scribbled in the margins of the maps, calculations that Deputy Mitchell couldn't begin to understand, but which appeared to involve depth measurements, structural load calculations, and what looked like chemical formulas. Dr. Elena's field equipment was neatly organized in the back room of the cabin, with soil samples labeled and dated up until July 20th, 5 days after their last phone contact. Her field notebook was open to a page that contained sketches of underground formations and notes about unusual acoustic properties and electromagnetic anomalies detected in the area. But here's what made Deputy Mitchell's blood run cold, and what still gives me chills when I think about it. There were 4 plates set out for dinner on the kitchen table, with food still on them. The food had long since spoiled and attracted insects, but you could still clearly see what had been their last meal: grilled chicken, corn on the cob, green beans, and what appeared to be homemade bread. 4 glasses of what had once been milk sat beside the plates, now curdled and rancid. The meal appeared to have been interrupted mid-bite. Forks were still loaded with food. Sofia's glass was tipped over as if she had knocked it over in her haste to leave the table, and Ricardo's chair was pushed back at an angle that suggested he had stood up quickly. It was as if the entire family had simply vanished in the middle of their evening meal, leaving behind a scene that would haunt every investigator who saw it. The initial search effort was extensive and well coordinated. Local law enforcement, park rangers from the Devil's Tower National Monument, and volunteer search teams from 3 surrounding counties combed through hundreds of square miles of Wyoming wilderness. The terrain was challenging. Rocky outcroppings, dense forests, and steep ravines that could easily conceal evidence or, God forbid, bodies. They found the family's rental car parked about 2 miles from the cabin near a trailhead that led into some of the most remote areas of the region. The vehicle was locked and completely undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Inside the car, investigators discovered Dr. Elena's primary field notebook, which contained detailed entries dated up until July 20th. Her final entry was brief but haunting. Ricardo's calculations were correct. The formation is much larger and more complex than we initially thought. The children are fascinated by the acoustic properties of the underground chambers. We're planning to explore the deeper sections tomorrow. The equipment readings are unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of geological research. Search dogs were brought in from Denver and tracked the family's scent from the cabin to a rocky outcropping about a mile northeast of where their car was found. The dogs seemed confident in their tracking until they reached a specific point near what appeared to be a natural limestone formation. At that location, all 4 scent trails simply ended, not faded away gradually, as you might expect if the family had gotten into a vehicle or changed direction. The trails ended abruptly, as if the Duarte family had somehow vanished into thin air at that exact spot. The search teams expanded their efforts, using helicopters with thermal imaging equipment and ground-penetrating radar to scan the surrounding areas. They found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no signs of struggle or foul play. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed the family whole. The FBI was called in after 2 weeks of fruitless searching. Agent Sarah Mitchell, a veteran investigator who specialized in missing persons cases involving families, arrived from the Denver field office to take over the federal investigation. Agent Mitchell told me years later, during one of our many conversations about the case, that she had never encountered a disappearance quite like the Duarte case. In most missing persons investigations, she explained, you find some kind of trail, some indication of what happened or where the people might have gone. Even in cases where families are murdered and the bodies are hidden, there are usually signs of struggle, evidence of planning, witnesses who saw something unusual. With the Duartes, we had absolutely nothing. It was as if they had simply been erased from existence between the evening of July 20th and whenever someone next looked for them. The FBI's investigation lasted 8 months and involved resources that most missing persons cases never receive. They conducted aerial searches using military-grade equipment, deployed ground teams with the most advanced search technology available at the time, and even brought in specialists from the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit to create psychological profiles of the family members. They interviewed everyone the Duartes had known, from childhood friends to recent colleagues, looking for any indication that the family might have had reasons to disappear voluntarily. They examined the family's financial records going back 10 years, searching for signs of financial distress, unusual transactions, or evidence that they might have been planning to disappear and start new lives elsewhere. What troubled the federal investigators most was the complete absence of any logical explanation for the disappearance. The Duartes had no financial problems. In fact, their bank accounts showed substantial savings and recently deposited paychecks. They had no marital issues that anyone was aware of, no legal troubles, no known enemies or threats. Dr. Ricardo's work, while sometimes involving classified government contracts, was primarily theoretical research that posed no obvious danger to him or his family. The projects he had worked on were related to cellular regeneration and biochemical processes, important work, but hardly the kind that would make someone want to harm him. Dr. Elena's geological research was entirely academic and involved no controversial or dangerous subjects. The children were well-adjusted teenagers with no history of behavioral problems, drug use, or association with dangerous individuals. Miguel was looking forward to starting his senior year of high school and had already been accepted to several prestigious universities. Sophia was excited about her upcoming freshman year and had plans to continue her geological studies. Neither child had any reason to want to disappear, and both were too young to have orchestrated such a complete vanishing on their own. Every expert who examined the case came to the same baffling conclusion. This family had no reason to disappear voluntarily, and even if they had wanted to vanish, they would have needed resources, connections, and planning capabilities that left no trace in their backgrounds or behaviors. As the months turned into years, the Duarte case became one of those mysteries that haunted everyone who had worked on it. Agent Mitchell kept the file on her desk for 3 full years before finally moving it to the cold case archives. And even then, she told me, she would pull it out periodically to review the evidence and wonder what she might have missed. Sheriff Tom Bradley, who had been in charge of the initial local investigation, told me that he never stopped thinking about that empty cabin and those 4 plates of spoiled food. In 32 years of law enforcement, he said, I never saw anything that made less sense. Every case, even the strangest ones, usually have some kind of logic to them when you dig deep enough. But the Duartes, it was like they had been plucked off the face of the earth by aliens or something. By 1990, the official search had been suspended, though the case technically remained open. The family was declared legally dead in 1993, a legal necessity that allowed their estate to be settled and their assets to be distributed to surviving relatives. Maria Santos inherited her sister's personal belongings and used a portion of the family's savings to hire private investigators twice, in 1994 and again in 1998. Both investigations turned up nothing new. The private detectives retraced the FBI's steps, interviewed the same witnesses, and examined the same evidence. They came to the same conclusion that the federal investigators had reached. The Duarte family had simply vanished without a trace. The cabin where the Duartes had stayed was eventually sold to new owners in 1995. The new owners, a retired couple from Colorado, reported no unusual activity during their ownership of the property. They used it as a vacation retreat for several years, before selling it again in 2001 to a family from Utah. Life moved on, as it always does, but the questions remained unanswered. Where had the Duarte family gone? What had happened during those mysterious 5 days between Elena's last phone call and when they vanished? Why had they left everything behind, including a half-eaten meal, as if they were planning to return at any moment? And what had Dr. Elena meant when she wrote about acoustic properties and electromagnetic anomalies in her final field notes? For 17 long years, those questions had no answers. The Duarte family became a footnote in the annals of unsolved mysteries, one of those cases that occasionally gets mentioned in documentaries about missing persons, but never resolved. Local folklore in the area began to include stories about the ghost family that had disappeared near Devil's Tower, and amateur investigators would sometimes visit the area hoping to find clues that the professionals had missed. But no new evidence emerged, no witnesses came forward, and no bodies were ever found. I probably never would have heard their story, and it would have remained just another cold case gathering dust in a file cabinet if it weren't for what happened on June 3rd, 2003. That was the day a massive tornado ripped through northeastern Wyoming, and the day that everything we thought we knew about the Duarte family changed forever. The tornado was classified as an EF4, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded in that part of Wyoming. With winds reaching nearly 200 miles per hour, it carved a path of destruction 23 miles long and over a mile wide at its peak intensity. The storm moved through the area like a natural bulldozer, destroying everything in its path: homes, barns, power lines, thousands of acres of forest, and even some of the geological formations that had attracted tourists to the region for decades. The National Weather Service described it as a once-in-a-century storm, the kind of natural disaster that reshapes entire landscapes. But it also did something else, something that would reopen the Duarte case and reveal secrets that no one could have imagined. I was called to the tornado damage site 3 days after the storm had passed. At that time, I was working as a cold case investigator for the Wyoming State Police, specializing in missing persons cases that had gone unsolved for more than 5 years. The National Weather Service was conducting routine damage assessments when one of their surveyors, a methodical man named Robert Chen, found something unusual in the tornado's path. About 5 miles from where the Duarte family had disappeared 17 years earlier, the storm had torn away not just trees and topsoil, but had actually carved deep gouges into the bedrock itself, exposing underground formations that had been hidden for decades or possibly centuries. When I arrived at the site on June 6, 2003, I could immediately see what had captured Robert Chen's attention. The tornado had stripped away approximately 8 feet of soil, vegetation, and debris, creating what looked like a massive excavation site. But this wasn't just random storm damage. In one of the deepest gouges, where the tornado's winds had been most intense, Robert had discovered something that made him immediately contact the authorities. The corner of what appeared to be a large concrete structure, partially exposed and clearly artificial. The structure had smooth, poured concrete walls with what looked like reinforced construction techniques. But here's what made it so significant and so mysterious. This building was at least 30 feet underground, and according to every geological survey, property record, and historical document we could find, there should have been nothing but natural rock formations in this area. The excavation process took 2 full weeks and required specialized equipment borrowed from the State Highway Department. What we uncovered as we carefully removed tons of debris and soil defied every expectation and challenged everything I thought I knew about the Duarte case. Buried beneath the Wyoming wilderness was a fully functional underground facility, a complex that was clearly designed for long-term human habitation and sophisticated scientific research. The facility consisted of multiple levels, connected by reinforced concrete corridors and equipped with ventilation systems that were still operational after being buried for decades. Emergency lighting flickered to life when we restored power using portable generators brought in from Cheyenne. Climate control systems hummed back to life as if they had been waiting patiently for someone to flip a switch. The main level of the facility contained laboratories that were unlike anything I had ever seen. The equipment was sophisticated beyond what should have been available in the 1980s, with computer systems that appeared to be decades ahead of their time and scientific instruments that our technical experts couldn't immediately identify. Chemical analysis equipment lined the walls of one laboratory, while another room contained what appeared to be biological research stations with microscopes, centrifuges, and preservation equipment that was still functional. A third laboratory was filled with geological analysis tools, rock samples, and detailed maps of underground formations that extended far beyond the local area. But it was in the deepest level of the facility that we made the most disturbing discoveries. Here we found living quarters that had clearly been designed for a family. 4 bedrooms, each personalized with belongings that matched descriptions from the 1986 missing persons reports. A communal kitchen equipped with a sophisticated air filtration system and food storage capabilities that could have sustained a family for months or even years. A recreation area filled with books, games, and educational materials. The children's rooms contained clothes, personal items, and schoolwork that had been dated as recently as 1994, 8 years after the family had officially disappeared from the surface world. Miguel's room contained advanced chemistry sets, scientific journals, and research notes written in handwriting that matched samples taken from his school records. The progression of his work, as documented in notebook after notebook, showed a brilliant young mind that had continued to develop and learn during the years he had supposedly been missing. Sophia's room was filled with rock and mineral collections, geological surveys, and detailed maps of underground cave systems that extended for hundreds of miles beneath the Wyoming landscape. Her work showed the same intellectual growth and development, suggesting that both children had continued their education in this underground facility. Dr. Elena's research materials filled an entire room, including geological surveys of the area that went far deeper and were far more detailed than any official survey had ever attempted. Her maps showed underground formations, water sources, and structural characteristics that suggested she had spent years exploring and documenting the subterranean world beneath Wyoming. Some of her surveys were dated as recently as 1998, 12 years after the family had disappeared from the cabin above. But it was in Dr. Ricardo's private office that we found the evidence that would change everything. A detailed journal that documented the final days of the Duarte family's life on the surface and their transition to a hidden existence underground. According to the journal entries, which were written in Dr. Ricardo's careful handwriting and dated from July 1986 through what appeared to be early 2003, the family hadn't disappeared at all. They had gone into hiding, retreating to a facility that Ricardo had apparently been constructing in secret for several years prior to their disappearance. The early entries revealed that Ricardo had been working on highly classified research for an unnamed government agency, research that involved what he described as life extension protocols, cellular regeneration enhancement, and consciousness preservation techniques. But something had gone terribly wrong with his work, or more accurately, someone had decided that his research was too dangerous to continue. The journal entries from July 1986 showed increasing paranoia and desperation. Ricardo wrote about pressure from his government handlers, about threats to his family's safety, about demands that he turn over his research and submit to what he called permanent monitoring and control. He described meetings with men in dark suits who made it clear that his family's continued existence depended on his cooperation. But Ricardo had apparently decided that cooperation was not an option. Instead, he had chosen to disappear completely, taking his family and his research underground where no one could find them. The entries became increasingly detailed as Ricardo documented their preparations for disappearing. He had been planning their underground refuge for years, using his wife's geological expertise to identify the perfect location and his own resources to construct a facility that could sustain his family indefinitely. The underground complex had been built gradually, with supplies and equipment moved in small quantities over several years to avoid detection. By July 1986, the facility was ready to become their permanent home. The final surface entry in Ricardo's journal was dated July 25, 1986, exactly 10 days after Elena's last phone call to her sister. It read, "Elena's seismic monitoring equipment indicates increasing underground activity. The children are frightened, but they understand why we can't return to the surface. Not yet, perhaps not ever. I've activated the lockdown protocols that will seal the entrance and make our facility undetectable from above. If anyone ever finds this journal, know that we chose this existence. We chose to disappear rather than allow our research to be used for purposes we couldn't control. The children will adapt to this life. They have to. God forgive me for the choice I've made for all of us." Below Ricardo's final entry, written in different handwriting that matched samples from Miguel's school records, someone had added, "Dad was wrong about us adapting. We can't stay down here forever. Sophia is getting sick, and I think Mom is losing her mind. Something has to change. Miguel, March 1994. Below that, in what appeared to be Sophia's handwriting, Miguel left last night. He said he was going to find a way back to the surface. That was 6 months ago. We haven't seen him since. I don't think he's coming back. Sophia, September 1994. But here's where the story takes a turn that still keeps me awake at night, even years after making these discoveries. When we finished our complete excavation and documentation of the underground facility, we found no trace of the Duarte family themselves. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had ultimately happened to them after they entered their underground refuge. The facility showed clear signs of recent habitation, food supplies that hadn't expired, beds that appeared to have been slept in within the past few months, research notes and journal entries that continued well into 2003, just months before the tornado exposed their hiding place. The most disturbing discovery came in what appeared to be Dr. Ricardo's final research laboratory, a room we found sealed behind a reinforced door that took our excavation team 3 days to cut through. Here we discovered equipment that our technical experts still can't fully explain or understand. Devices that seem designed to map and record brain activity in ways that shouldn't have been possible with any technology available in the 1980s, 1990s, or even today. There were isolation chambers, each one large enough to hold an adult human being, connected to complex monitoring and life support systems. Cables and wires connected these chambers to computer systems that hummed with activity even after being sealed underground for years. In a climate-controlled storage room that we found behind Ricardo's final laboratory, we made a discovery that defied all scientific explanation. 4 containers, each about the size of a large computer server, filled with some kind of biological preservation fluid that maintained a constant temperature and chemical composition. When we carefully opened these containers under sterile conditions, we found neural tissue, human neural tissue, preserved in a state that our forensic scientists described as biologically active and neurologically responsive. DNA analysis confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. The tissue samples belonged to the Duarte family, all 4 of them. But the tissue wasn't just preserved in the way you might expect from any normal preservation process. According to our neurologists, it was somehow still functioning, still generating the electrical activity and neural responses you would expect to find in living brain tissue. Our medical experts said it was impossible. Brain tissue, they explained, couldn't survive outside the human body for more than a few minutes under even the best preservation conditions. Yet here, we had neural tissue that had been maintained in an active state for what appeared to be years, possibly decades. The preservation fluid contained compounds that our chemists couldn't identify, and the monitoring equipment showed brainwave patterns that suggested not just biological activity, but complex, organized thought processes. It was as if the Duarte family's minds were somehow still alive and conscious, trapped in these preservation chambers, but still thinking, still aware. The laboratory contained detailed documentation of Dr. Ricardo's final experiments, research into what he called consciousness mapping and preservation protocols. According to his notes, which became increasingly erratic and desperate in tone as they progressed through the 1990s, he had been working on a way to record and preserve human consciousness independently of the physical body. The technology involved complex brain mapping techniques, neural interface systems, and what he described as digital consciousness transfer protocols. His research suggested that he had found a way to essentially upload a person's mind into a digital format while keeping the brain tissue viable for potential future restoration to a physical body. The implications of Ricardo's research were staggering and terrifying. If his notes were accurate, he had achieved something that modern science considers decades away from being possible: the complete preservation of human consciousness independent of the body. But the personal cost had been devastating. Journal entries from Dr. Elena, found scattered throughout the facility, documented the psychological toll of their underground existence. She wrote about increasing depression, about watching her children grow up in isolation, about the gradual breakdown of their family relationships under the stress of their hidden life. Sophia's journal, which we found in her bedroom, painted an even more disturbing picture. Her entries from the mid-1990s described increasing illness, weakness, and what she called episodes, where she would lose consciousness for hours or days at a time. She wrote about her father's increasingly obsessive focus on his consciousness preservation research and her mother's gradual withdrawal from family life. Most disturbing of all, she documented what appeared to be the voluntary participation of family members in Ricardo's experiments, beginning with Miguel in 1994 and progressing through the rest of the family over the following years. As I write this report, 6 months after our discovery of the underground facility, we still don't have complete answers to the questions raised by the Duarte case. The FBI has classified most of our findings under national security provisions, and I've been told that further investigation is being handled by agencies that I don't have clearance to know about. The excavation site has been sealed and is now guarded by federal security personnel. The official story, the one that appeared in local newspapers and will eventually make it into historical records, is that the tornado exposed a Cold War-era research bunker that had been forgotten by government record keepers. But I know what I saw down there. I know what we found. I know that somewhere in those preservation chambers, the Duarte family might still exist in some form that challenges our understanding of life, death, and consciousness itself. The equipment in that final laboratory is still running, still monitoring something that our instruments detect as organized brain activity. The computers continue to process data, to record information, to maintain whatever digital existence Dr. Ricardo may have created for his family. The last piece of evidence we recovered was a digital recording found deep in Dr. Ricardo's computer system. The file was time-stamped June 1st, 2003, just 2 days before the tornado that exposed their underground world to the surface. In the recording, you can hear voices, distorted and electronic, but unmistakably human. One voice, processed through what sounds like sophisticated audio equipment, but still recognizable as Dr. Ricardo's, says, "The seismic monitoring equipment is showing unprecedented activity levels. Elena's calculations indicate that we may be facing a significant geological event within the next few days. The children are asking if we should attempt to return to the surface, but after 17 years, I'm not sure there's still a surface world that would accept us." Another voice, younger and filled with what sounds like electronic distortion, but still identifiably human emotion, responds, "Dad, we can't stay like this forever. Miguel was right when he tried to leave. We're not really alive anymore, are we? We're something else, something between life and death. How much longer can we exist in this state?" A third voice, which could be Dr. Elena based on speech patterns and vocal characteristics, adds, "The preservation systems are beginning to show signs of stress. If we don't make a decision soon, the choice may be made for us." The recording continues for another 47 minutes, but most of it consists of electronic noise and fragmented conversations that our audio specialists haven't been able to clean up enough to understand. That recording was made just 48 hours before a massive tornado tore through the area and exposed the Duarte family's underground world to sunlight for the first time in 17 years. Was it coincidence? Did Dr. Ricardo's seismic monitoring equipment actually predict the tornado that would reveal their hiding place? Or was there something more deliberate about the timing, something that suggests the family may have somehow chosen to have their story discovered? I don't have answers to those questions. I may never have answers. What I do know is that the Duarte family disappeared in 1986, and in some form that challenges our understanding of human existence, may have continued to live underground for nearly 2 decades. Their story raises questions about the limits of science, the price of knowledge, and the lengths to which people will go to protect their families from forces beyond their control. What do you think really happened to the Duarte family? Were they victims of government conspiracy who chose to disappear rather than compromise their principles? Did Dr. Ricardo's experiment succeed in preserving his family's consciousness in some digital form that we don't yet understand? Are they somehow still alive in those preservation chambers, waiting for someone to find a way to restore them to physical existence? Or is there something even more sinister hidden beneath the Wyoming wilderness, something that the authorities don't want the public to know about? Leave your theory in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the boundaries between life and death.